What is democracy? It is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of course. Many things can be said about what precisely our democracy is. Many lines have been spoken about freedom and liberty and responsibility. But where is the absolute truth?
In a way.
180 years of searching and I'm 3 feet away. Of all the words written here about freedom, there's a line that's at the heart of all the others. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. People don't talk that way anymore.
People no longer speak in this way, because in much the same way that planets drift slowly away from a sun, the idea of democracy has gone far from the ideals of the Founding Fathers. It has been manipulated, molded, even mutated to mean different things, to suit the needs of the successors of the Founding Fathers. A prime example of this was the 1830 Indian Removal Act, enforced by Jackson in 1831, often overshadowed by the injustice of slavery which paralleled this simultaneously. The Trail of Tears was a genocide. People were considered less than and removed. This was the first offense in a long line to follow against the ideals of the Founding Fathers. Democracy in this instance was an American discovery in their ability to exercise executive democratic power over others, especially a minority population. But the mutation of democracy had just begun. And what could follow such atrocity? In a different, less violent, but just as violating approach, the country shifted towards social control. Presented in the 1920s was the Roaring Twenties, the first consumerism boom. But it was also a noose on dietary freedom. Democracy in the 1920s was a fascination with an almost dictative governmental ban on alcohol, followed by a similar approach to control of the stock market in the 1930s. After a depression, a war, and a dramatic improvement in living conditions, another dramatic shift in the history of the nation was the democracy of the 1960s, which was framed as separate and not equal. It wrestled with ludicrous confliction and often honored bigotry and racism over logic. And for the first time, there was a great uprising, both peaceful and restless, from the core of the suppression. But by the end of this era, the governmental tune had changed, and was beginning to give all of its citizens their rights. But why had they been restricted in the first place? Perhaps what would happen next would show that our own internal struggle was too great to handle ourselves. We went global. This was in a different sense than the first two world wars. Democracy in the Cold War shattered the confines of isolationism to give a helping hand to communist nations. In our own involvement in Vietnam and Korea, we exercised our power, but gained little. The measure of what we did or did not do is not possible to ascertain, but it would seem that we altered the world no alternative anyway. Around the same time, in the late 1880s, there was a shift from city to suburb under the coercion of Reaganomics, where bigger was better. This existential squandering of our democracy still haunts us today. And then something happened that would wake us up. Something that would make us stand at attention. Democracy today is a return from the cosmos. It would seem that our focus is returned to the vision of absolute democracy when our existence was threatened on September the 11th of 2001, the day our country was attacked. It took such a violent instance to make us stand up under the volition of that initial definition and defend. Yes, there is nearly as much division within us as there is that which opposes us, and yes, we are still separate and nationally unequal. At the core, though, democracy still exists. But after all that we have done to make it work for us, it would hardly be recognizable to the likes of Benjamin Franklin or George Washington. As an enormous wealthy superpower of a nation, we have indulged in the luxury of disconnect. We appeal to the logic of separating ourselves from what we do, believing that we can live in a place and refuse to care about it, its function, its representation. Absolute democracy would not have allowed this. Democracy has not plateaued. It has barely begun.